I'm Peter Austin, founder and director of the 1960s Project, with what we're doing, the serious motive of why we're doing it, how you can help, as well as next steps beyond the campaign. We're coming to you after years of working on something having to do with a period of time I, I bet you don't know. I'm not sure anybody's tried to do this, covering things about an era that people think they know so well. And it's interesting because people don't know about these things, even people who lived at the time, who may be listening to this campaign, because lots of things in the 1960s have been kind of crowded out by one way of looking at the era. Books, articles, conferences on the 60s repeat over and over and over again the same stuff that don't talk about anything but the psychedelic, free love, flower power sort of Vietnam protest rock and roll 60s, which is important stuff and sort of interesting, but it ain't the whole story. The typical view of the era leaves out the huge numbers of people who may have known about the protests, feminism, the summer of love, no doubt heard about the marches, the communes, and the war, of course, but most were busy raising families, going to church, starting businesses, inventing things, writing books, practicing the piano, trying to be the best they could be in whatever their chosen field was. We want to give attention to some of these things these busy men and women did, their inventions, accomplishments that you may already know. Like, I don't know, the first computer mouse, Kevlar in chemistry, Post-it, sticky notes in manufacturing, the discovery of pulsars in the universe, laser sailboats, and maybe Ruger's 1022 rifle. You know these. Maybe some of them, you use some of them, but you likely don't associate them with the typical story of the 60s. And before you say, well, these are just bits of trivia, I guess you could say that. On the other hand, they represent something important. They're examples of the enormous vitality and variety within the United States and within the American economy and spirit of the 1960s. And even if you did simply think they're bits of trivia, I bet most of you were really surprised to find out that these things come out of this time you only associate with LSD, free love, Martin Luther King, an important man, and anti-war protests. Wow, that happened during this time? This happened? Engineers at Boeing launched the 747 the same year as Woodstock in 1969? Really? The 737 came out of the 1960s too? The only plane Southwest Airlines, for example, flies today. And Southwest was one of thousands of companies we've found that either got started in the 60s or went public. Who knew? We have two different lists of these companies whose names you know in our published work you can see, which might surprise you. Besides companies, how about architecture? The World Trade Centers, for example, were built in the 1960s era. Can you believe it? Or the artificial hip in surgery that allowed people to walk again. Not a small thing. We could go on. But everybody is surprised. They're also intrigued. We're intrigued. That makes it so great. We're as intrigued as the people who talk to us. We keep digging, wondering what else we've missed. And these discoveries drive the idea that there was a lot more going on in the 60s than rock and roll and protests. On Instagram and LinkedIn, we've been posting week after week after week great examples of human achievement in field after field to get the word out about what we do, from architecture to archaeology and tennis, things that a few years ago we had no idea about. And we found out that very few people did either. But the more we looked, the more we found, and boy, do these things go a long way to explaining why today looks the way it does. How about the coronavirus? Heard of it? The human coronavirus is actually tagged and named in 1967. To me, this is amazing stuff. And I guess that's why I'm talking to you this way. Excited. Because these things have been obscured for so long, precisely because of when they happened, obscured by the typical accounts of the turbulent, loud 1960s by teachers and commentators who don't even know anything's missing. So we view this typical psychedelic, loud, protesting approach to the 1960s to the exclusion of anything else as really overdone and incomplete and unacceptable. We're trying to set the record straight a bit. I guess what we're trying to do is politically incorrect. There's the politically incorrect guide to the 1960s. But what we do here has nothing to do with being correct or politically correct or incorrect. Or we're historians and people trying to complete a period of time that's incompletely portrayed and even distorted. This said, we're kind of on a mission, an important one. We're trying to change the kind of cartoon caricature that the 1960s have become. Because the years of the 1960s have a kind of conceit associated with them by people wrapped up in teaching about them. The 1980s, the 1990s, or the 1890s don't have the cachet of the 1960s, or usually have courses devoted to them. The 1960s are singled out in college course catalogs, held in high esteem on university campuses as no other decade is. If people think about the 60s in a certain way, it starts early in high school and university. In college courses, 18 and 19-year-old students sign up for a rumor of what they think the period was. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, protest, psychedelic, anti-war this and anti-establishment that. Students certainly get this by most professors and nothing else. And seriously, these courses on the 1960s tend to be a gateway to indoctrination, subtle and not so subtle, for undergraduates in college. Drugs lionized, marriage degraded, the serious strategic issues of Vietnam trivialized and America discredited. The portrayal of feminism ostracizes the guys in the class. They lift up quasi-terrorist groups like the Weathermen and the Black Panthers. And important civil rights issues portray the United States as a hopelessly prejudiced country, racist to the core. If you've wondered where today's problems, such as critical race theory, CRT, in education began, look no further than the dark vision portrayed by many courses on the 1960s, tearing down the United States, making people feel guilty, students feel guilty, as Americans, creating activists to rage against imagined wrongs and lifting up dubious people to admire. But how are students to know what's happening? How are they supposed to know any differently? They never hear anything else about the things in the 60s and the early 70s that we're putting on display here. Things to marvel at, admire, be proud of in the American experience. Students never hear about the achievers and doers, the constructive side, good side of the era. I can tell you one thing. A lot of American students love their country and welcome the kind of news we're bringing to them. So part of our mission, the why, is countering the toxicity in the colleges and in K-12 that has become almost a national emergency. Our mission is for those people who believe that America can be a land of the free and home of the brave and a place for achievers still. And for those also who believe history can have powerful relevance. In my work as a professional historian, I've always believed that history is at its best when it gives you some kind of perspective on the present. Actionable intelligence. One of the things we do at the project is to connect the 1960s to things happening today, right here, right now. Like the examples of the coronavirus in 1967 I mentioned a few minutes ago. A whole section of the website called The 1960s Today links the events and people of the 60s to what is happening right here, right now. How about 6 examples? The connection between the evacuations of Afghanistan and Vietnam are alarming and stark. We write about them. NASA is now getting interested in flights to our neighbor Venus. You only hear about the moon in the 1960s, which is huge and good. But while Apollo happened, the Soviets actually landed a probe on Venus. We're writing about the connections of Soviet Venus flights to NASA today. How about car designs? Some of the Jeeps on the road today, like the Gladiator, maybe you saw one of those on the way into work today. They came out of the 1960s. International affairs. India and Pakistan are close to war again. They fought in the 1960s and went nuclear then too. This is not funny, since war might happen again, and we write about it. Another not funny is fentanyl. This started off as a wonder drug 100 times more powerful than morphine, synthesized by Janssen Pharmaceutical in the 1960s. With the Mexican border open, the 1960s fentanyl and its derivatives are in the news for all the wrong reasons today, as a scourge on American life. We write about the medical triumph fentanyl was in surgery in the 1960s, but the sadness it is today. Saddam Hussein, heard of him? Comes to power in Iraq in 1969. Don't hear about him in college courses on the 60s. Okay. How about a seventh one? Last year, President Trump awarded the Medal of Freedom to a man named Jim Ryan, Ryun, who broke the world record in the mile run as a high schooler from Kansas in 1962. What a connection to the 1960s, and what relevance! No 1960s hippies, sex, drugs, and rock and roll here. Just grit, determination, and discipline of a high school junior. And this isn't just a game of Jeopardy, recounting facts and trivia. No, it's the very stuff, the knowledge of the past, the precedents that enable you to understand the present, to give perspective so you can vote better, and crucial for the survival of the constitutional republic itself. This makes up the threads of our work and the freedom to get information out about whole parts of the 1960s period that simply are never ever talked about, never revealed, never celebrated, never connected until now with us. And we want you to be a part of it. Help us do it. Help us show a whole unknown side of an era, and maybe, just maybe, change the narrative for the better. As a tenured professor, I taught a wildly successful large lecture class on the 1960s at St. Edward's University for about must have been 10 years. And I can tell you there's nothing like we're trying to do out there in the world. We've looked. And based on our conclusion that the thing has legs, I, Casey Gibbs, Marcos Hernandez, and Alex Berenson got some momentum, designed and built phase one with enthusiasm and time, but without support, certainly without funding. I'll tell you, if time was money, we'd be rich. With phase one, the basic building done, we need your help with moving on to phase two, the sort of ram it home phase. First, we have to fill out, can you believe it, about 50 categories from physics to NASCAR to performing arts, so that each one feels more complete. For about a dozen fields, we've built movable timelines. You can check, for example, a medicine or zoology to see hints of what we've done there. Secondly, writing short articles, about 1,000 words each. We want to have about 5 to 10 for each discipline. For credibility, 5 for chemistry, 5 for football, 5 and 10 for finance, this sort of thing. We want to have a couple of hundred articles total, but we're about 20% where we want to be. To do this, we want to pay writers and researchers that have been enthusiastic up till this time. Liam, Luke, Marcos, Lauren, for example, they're all on the website. They're enthusiastic, but working up until now for free. And we want to start paying an honorarium for respect and thanks. Thirdly, we want to produce interviews of people who built lives during the period, ran businesses, developed products, raised families during the 1960s. Just a few interviews I've lined up. A former chairman of Texas Instruments, Mr. Bill Mitchell, a Delta airline pilot in Texas, a neurosurgeon who made his career at the University of Minnesota, Vietnam veterans, proud of their service, who keep in touch with their buddies, and finally, a nuclear submarine captain who lives in Santa Barbara. We want to do as many in-person interviews as we can. We need interview equipment to hire videographers to do a good and credible job. Great content and interviews up front. But behind the scenes, we need tech expertise on an ongoing basis, sort of invisible stuff. We need, for example, to figure out what search engine optimization, how it works. And more than this, we sometimes imagine what we'd like to do, but we have no idea how to do it. And so we need money to hire tech wizards to help us, to get to sort of have us, to ask us, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? We need resources for these sort of Harry Potter wizards to carry things out. And that's where your support can come in. It's all part of phase two, the ramming this home, this sort of thing, ramming phase one home, filling things out after we have a running start. Down the road, we hope to come to phase three. Say after a year, we've got the categories done, lots of good material. Our ambition is to make a film series, maybe, get it out, maybe into schools and colleges even. What a concept. We've started to think with this new endpoint in mind, because it might affect what we do in phase two, which is what this phase two campaign is about. My thinking on the project has changed before. We had several publishers who wanted to grab the 1960s project for books, but we realized the web was best for the expansiveness of what we had in mind. A film series is a direction we've only considered recently and wanted to mention it here as a sort of magnet to pull us to a bigger and richer sort of picture of what we're trying to accomplish. And we're picturing episode after episode: astronomy one week, geology another, movies and books and sculpture another week, civil engineering, then the stock market, sports, to really communicate that here was an era, important, all right, but for all the reasons people don't know. For now, we need your help to whatever degree you deem good to gather information together. Our track record is established, our motives are clear, and though there's no original research here per se, it's a startlingly original approach that has never been done before. Because the other stuff, the typical 60s stuff, has been done too much. So if you want cutting edge, you're at the right place. Finding and showing Americans operating and achieving in a free society, pursuing happiness in 1,000 ways, achievements unknown, though, crowded out because of the era when they took place, but by their efforts, improving the lives of all of us today. Not bad, I'd say. We don't know how it will end, but with your help, we can move with renewed resolve. Thanks for considering being part of our journey. We hope to earn your trust with our work, and we'll keep you updated along the way. Thank you.